Good afternoon. Hello. I'm Alberto Fierro, the Consul General of Mexico in Boston, and I'm very glad to welcome you to one more of our series of conversations with Mexicans in New England that we have been organizing with the aim of transmitting to a broad audience the importance of culture and education and the challenges and opportunities that have allowed us Mexicans in New England to contribute to the educational system here. Today, the topic is addressing educational challenges for Latin communities in New England. And as you know, we have Dr. Elia Bruggeman, high school superintendent overseeing a cohort of Boston Public Schools secondary schools, and María Luisa Parra-Velasco, senior preceptor in Romance languages and literatures from Harvard. Welcome, Elia and María Luisa. Thank you for wanting to share with us your expertise. Let me read some elements, bio elements of our two guests today. Dr. Bruggeman is originally from Mexico, from Acapulco in particular, and has lived in the United States for over 35 years, working in the K-12 system for public and private schools, as well as higher education. Before coming to Boston, she had been Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Education in the state of Minnesota, and also Deputy Education Officer with Minneapolis Public Schools. She was a professor at Minnesota State University in Mankato, a high school principal, and has taught business, English as a second language, and Spanish classes. She holds a bachelor's degree in business education and Spanish, a master's degree in Spanish language and literature, and a doctoral degree in educational administration and leadership from St. Cloud State University. Elia, what an impressive CV you have.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
María Luisa, Dr. Parra has a BA in psychology, a PhD in Hispanic linguistics, and 15 years of experience in the fields of second language acquisition and child bilingual development. She has taught Spanish language and culture at Boston University and in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures at Harvard, where she is currently senior preceptor. Her research interests include child language development and bilingualism, Latino families and immigration and education. María Luisa, thank you so much for wanting to be with us today.
Thank you, Alberto.
And so you both are engaged in bilingual and bicultural, binational education here in the US. What can you tell us about your own trajectory as binational educators, but also as binational women, and about the path that brought you from Mexico to the US and in particular to New England? Who wants to begin?
Go ahead, María Luisa.
María Luisa.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, Alberto, and it's an honor for me to be sharing this conversation with Elia. That it's interesting that we not only share professional interests, but we also share some kind of gusto for the same colors in fashion, because in the pages announcing this conversation, we are dressed with the same colors. And today we are wearing the same colors. So I take that as a very good sign of alignment and sharing. But well, let me start by saying that I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, actually, because my father was a researcher and a physician. He has retired now, but he got his training at Johns Hopkins University, and I was born there. And I came back, we went back to Mexico City when I was about 2.5, with very limited language and Spanish proficiency. Actually, my parents tell the story that one time we were at the playground in Baltimore, and they saw me running very frustrated and crying, and a bunch of kids following me saying, nobody understands her, nobody understands her. And my mother thinks that was such a traumatic experience for me, that's the seed of my interest in language and communication in intercultural context, right? But I grew up in Mexico City. I went to public schools and to La UNAM and El Colegio de Mexico. And at the Colmex, when I was studying linguistics, coming from psychology and developmental psychology, Harvard, El Colegio de Mexico has a program, exchange program with the Department of Romance Languages. And I came here as a teaching assistant, thinking that I was going to be here for, a couple of years, 3 years, and go back to Mexico, a little bit following my parents' history. But today, it was exactly today, like 23 years ago that I left Mexico.
Wow.
And came here
Happy anniversary.
thinking that I was going to go back, and that has not happened. But I have gone back and forward every year. Actually, this is the first year that I cannot go to Mexico in the summer, but I've been going back and forward from a very privileged position of having been able to do that, having dual nationality, and being able to go between both countries. And that has given me a very particular perspective on both sides of the border. Having gone to public schools in Mexico and now taking distance from all that information in our own culture has made me appreciate it very much, and also understand, the huge challenges that families face when they come here, particularly when they are raising their children. I have 2 sons, and I have raised them bilingually, and that has taught me how hard it is to raise a bilingual child when you're surrounded with another language and culture, and you have to make particular efforts to provide that input and that knowledge of not only the language, but the culture, right? So in my work with Latino families, I've seen the difficulties, not only that they face with immigration and legal matters, but also educational, and how the systems here in the US and in Mexico do not have what is needed to embrace immigrant families from wherever they come. But now Mexican families coming here, but Mexican families going back to Mexico with children that mainly speaks English because they have lost it here, they can't find that support as well. So I see Mexico and the US sharing a very broad borderland, as Gloria Saldúa has stated, and many other scholars, Mexican Americans, have presented a territory, a borderland back and forward that we need to attend and provide these families with that kind of support for children to transition and to be successful in both sides of the border.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. We'll get back more to the challenges of bicultural and binational education. And it's the next question. Elia, tell us a little more about your trajectory too, how you came up and how has your life in the US been?
Sure. And again, thank you for having us. It is a pleasure to be with everyone. As you mentioned, Alberto, I am from the area of Acapulco. So to come from Acapulco to Minnesota to such a cold climate, I don't know. But anyway, my father actually used to come to the US with the Bracero program. So he came here as a migrant worker. And at one point, I told my father that I wanted to come and stay in the US to learn English because I wanted to become a lawyer. So then he told me, I will send you back as a foreign exchange student because you will not experience there the discrimination that many migrant workers experience. So he did send me, and I came here after high school as a foreign exchange student, then went back and I started the university in Acapulco for law school. But during that time, I met my husband, and right before college, we got married, and I ended up coming to Minnesota. So while in Minnesota, I thought, do I pursue my dream as a lawyer that I started in Mexico? We were in a very rural community where there was no university. I would have to travel 2.5 hours to go to law school. So then I decided that I was going to switch to business. So Mankato State University, or Minnesota State University in Mankato, was about an hour from me. And that's how I switched to study international business. But while doing that, I was also working as a paraprofessional in a school system. And it was there where I changed my career into education, because I saw that as a paraprofessional, I needed to do more to actually advocate for the Latino community in the area. So once I switched and I went into teaching, I became a teacher of business and business education in Spanish. And while they're trying to advocate for the rights of our Latino students, it seems that my voice wasn't going further. So I said, well, I need to join administration. So I went back then and I picked up the degree of a principal and superintendent. And that's how then I knew of the different type of programming I needed to advocate for our English language learners. And especially whether it was immersion school, bilingual program, dual language, or even home language programs for them. Then after that, I then went over and became, I got my doctoral degree, became a professor. And then I was also invited to join the commissioner at the state. And that provided me a bigger lens to take a look at the whole state and see where is it that I needed to provide support. And one of the areas that I oversaw, which has the title programs, and under title are English language learners. But besides that, I oversaw college and career readiness for secondary school, special education, etc. I had under me about 6 divisions. Aside from that, then I was going to retire, and then I was recruited to come to Boston. And I'm certainly glad I am here in Boston as one of the superintendents for high schools. And it is a pleasure to be here. That's where I actually met Maria Luisa, and her and I have talked about some things that we need to do to improve the education outcome for our Latino students. I have 4 children. 3 of them are in Minnesota, and 1 is in North Carolina. I certainly, I think that when I think about what we said that we need to do to empower our parents, to empower our students, to speak up for the needs that they face in the school systems, not just in New England, in Boston, but nationwide. Because, our Latino students are really at the bottom in the education system in this country, and we need to change that trajectory. So now going back to Minnesota, I became the first woman high school principal in Minnesota. And that also gave me the opportunity as a woman, as a binational woman, to lead the area of education and train my colleagues at the secondary high school on how is it that we implement programming for our English learners. So I'm certainly glad to be in Boston, and I look forward to all the innovation that we can work with Maria Luisa to improve the outcomes for our students.
So, and just for the general public, I used to be consul in Minnesota, where I met Elia, and I met her boss, the superintendent, Caselius, here in Boston, that used to be the secretary of education in Minnesota. So it's just an interesting thing that happened. So,
yeah.
So you both have already mentioned that some of the challenges that face immigrant families and binational, bicultural students. But if you were to choose one, which is the most important element that or challenge that has to be overcome by students, and what kind of help would they need to overcome this challenge? If you had to pick one, I know there's many, but.
we're going to speak about COVID later on, but there are so many challenges right now with COVID-19 that we all are facing for our Latino community. I will say right now the challenge is the access to provide to them, to our students, bilingual programs in New England, bilingual programs, even to teach them their first language, because research does show that once you learn your first language, you do better academically, whether they are immersion schools, providing those access and also to the rigor in the academics that is needed for them to be successful in their education. And family engagement, that was a second challenge in there. Yeah.
And it's true that very few times being bilingual is seen as an asset in the public school system, and it is a definite asset. And as you say, Elia, if you don't have your first language well learned, then you can't really have command of the second language.
Right.
Maria Luisa?
So I'm going to build on what Elia has already said, and I would add the challenge of teacher training. I worked with Latino families with young children transitioning from home to school in Somerville. I was a research program coordinator in a program that worked with Latino families there in Somerville. And what it was clear to me was that children are children, and they bring their own assets and possibilities and potential. Parents have their culture, their language, and teachers need the training to understand all those assets that come into their classrooms, so they can work with those, what children can create, instead of working from a deficit perspective. And I think that that's a big challenge for teacher programs, teacher development programs that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. Elia, you wrote a dissertation about some of the effects that a return to Mexico has for some Mexican-American students that Maria Luisa had mentioned already, and how it is very important for local education administrators at the primary and secondary level in the US to coordinate with Mexican education authorities. You even have done that between Minnesota and the state of Morelos, because the migrant community in Minnesota comes from Morelos. What can you tell us about the importance of supporting the education of these binational students?
Yeah, thank you, Alberto, for the question. And the purpose of the study that I did, and when I did the research, and when I actually went down to Xochiapan, Morelos in Mexico, it was to gather this data in order to assess the education impact of students returning to Mexico with their families, either by choice or deportation. And how is it that many students that were returning did not speak Spanish? So the recommendations that are in the study are based on feedback from parents. And as I interviewed, they addressed the lack of academic support in the schools in Mexico, the process of enrolling their children in Mexico, the wait time, and the bullying also that their students were experiencing. So some of the recommendations that were for academics, and they were also for social programs, and were on creating anti-bullying programs through the arts, because we know that through the arts, we can really communicate many ways for our students, but also through assemblies and displaying signs that embrace the students' assets that they will bring into their school and community. And also creating some peer advisory connections for our students that were in Mexico, and creating hub schools or welcome centers in the schools and the communities to provide information for referrals, whether they were social services, housing, because many of our families were encountering all of this when they were returning to Mexico, and also involving students in extracurricular activities, dealing with clubs, tutoring for their academics and sports, etc. And as Maria Luisa also mentioned, the training of teachers in Mexico, and especially the training on the history of migrant education, so that can embrace the child that was going through the migration, and also supporting students socially and academically. Furthermore, teachers needed to promote positive educational practices to serve migrant students. And then also the training of principals and the partnerships that needed to happen between principals from Mexico, where the students were coming from, and from the US, so that we don't have to reinvent what is it that we needed to know on best practices and brainstorming or best academic concerns that were happening in both countries. And of course, since a lot of our students, as I mentioned before, they do not speak Spanish as they are returning to Mexico, the creation of second language acquisition schools, immersion schools, and strategies also to teach on special education, because as you know, in Mexico, our special education is not as embedded into our classroom as it is here in the US. And parent engagement programs that to bring our parents to the schools. But I do note that further study is needed to place on the psychological, on the social and emotional impacts that our migrant children are facing due to deportation.
And I understand there's more than 500,000 Mexican youngsters studying in public schools in Mexico. So it is so important, the work that you both do, not only for education of migrants here in New England, in Boston, but also for the transnational educational system.
And you know, someday many of our students will return over to here to the US, because many are citizens of this country. Yeah. And we as a country need to be prepared to receive them. So it's imperative that we keep that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree. Now, I know that you're both working on a proposal addressing the kind of public policies that you have found are needed to tackle the education needs of our communities, our Hispanic, Latino communities here in Boston. Could you tell us a little bit of what that project is? Or is it a surprise that we cannot know yet?
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Elia. You are the mastermind here.
Okay, so you know, as we mentioned before, it's important for our students to have access to their first language, because research have shown us that they will do better academically, and also they will have a better success after their secondary or preparatory years, such as high school. So Maria Luisa and I have been meeting on collaborating, you know, with her department in Boston Public Schools on how is it that we provide access to language and higher academic rigor. So we've been talking about Maria Luisa doing some training for teachers on how is it that you teach to the home language, and how is it that then we place our students in courses that are at the college level, let's say for Spanish, college Spanish conversation, or also advanced placement Spanish, where they already getting credits for college and building their self-esteem about I am bringing getting to know my language better, and but also taking college courses and building on my GPA, which is going to be important for applying to college. And not only that, but for employment for the future, because you know, as we are hiring, we take a look at two candidates be having the same skills, but one is bilingual and one is not. And being bilingual, meaning in all that you write, you speak, you read their language, is also very important. So they will be better prepared for global competence in the job market in New England, and for the US and the world.
And it is true. I have met many Hispanics born in the US or that came as kids, many DACA kids whose oral Spanish is good, but the moment you ask them to write, it is difficult because they didn't have all this structural learning of the written Spanish, which it's easy to say it's written exactly as it's spoken, but it has rules, grammatical rules that are very important. But sorry for interrupting. Tell us a little bit more, Maria Luisa, about this joint projects.
Right. No, you're exactly right. I think that what we're trying to do is to find a way, a program, pilot program, to provide teachers with the, theoretical and pedagogical tools so they can harness on what students already know, even if it's, oral, but also for teachers to understand how hard it is to learn to write in the way that we are expecting. It's a different way to use language with their own rules, not only grammatical, but in terms of organizing a text, where is a text, and teachers, I know that they would benefit from having a more functional and more comprehensive overview of what that process entails. Elia has mentioned a couple of times the word process, and I think that that's really important that we take into account. Students migrating to the US, back to Mexico, learning a language, we all are involved in a process, and we tend to think that once they take a course, they are all set, and it's just one brick of the long road ahead, and we as teachers need to know how to keep building on those steps that students have already taken. So my work at Harvard now has been focused on designing pedagogical practices to really work with these strengths that the students bring into the classroom: linguistic, cultural, and provide them with opportunities, learning opportunities to learn about the language, the Spanish, back in Mexico or in their own countries, but also in the US. What's happening with Spanish in the US? Are we talking about the Spanish de Estados Unidos, from the US, in the US? Are we seeing new forms of Spanish forming and coming together? It's just that on the oral modality or also in the written modality. So there's a lot of very interesting discussions around linguistic processes and phenomena that we can build on to create critical language awareness, and so also social awareness, so students realize they're part of a structure, and it's not their fault that they don't know how to read and write. It's a system that has never supported, as you already said, Alberto, that possibility of fully being bilingual.
Well, I have good news for you that yesterday in the ceremony or commemoration or remembering of 1 year from the horrid attacks in El Paso, Texas, there was this public diplomacy program of the Foreign Ministry. There was an homage and several consuls and ambassadors participated. And the chair of the cultural diplomacy program announced the creation of a digital new media for Spanish in the US. So I'll share later all that information. So there will be, you were talking about the Spanish, which Spanishes? There are many Spanishes in the US because there are many regions, Mexicans and Latinos coming from many different regions, and we speak the same language, but at the same time, we speak different dialects or varieties. Yeah. So it's called the Cesar Chavez, and it was just announced yesterday. Maria, you already had experience teaching online before COVID with the Division of Continuing Education at Harvard. Some of our guests in these conversations have told us how Zoom and distance teaching has changed their lives in the last 4 months. Eh, what can you tell us of your own experience? Do you find the difference before and after COVID? And are teachers and students getting used to this media? Are you comfortable teaching remotely?
Right. Thank you for the question. Well, now I'm comfortable, but it took me time. At the beginning, when the Division of Continuous of the Education at Harvard Extension School asked me to give this class online, it's a class on Frida Kahlo and the Mexico, the first half of the 20th century, they asked me to do it online. I was very resistant. And I just couldn't imagine myself talking in line and having PowerPoints and videos and interacting with students in a computer. But I did it, I decided to do it. And it took me 2 semesters to really get into it. And yesterday in an orientation to our teaching assistants and fellows, I was saying, it's like when you learn how to drive or ride a bike, that at the beginning you have to be thinking about everything at the same time and you can't do things right. It takes practice. And it's the same with Zoom. You have to remember so many little pieces and steps. But once you learn them and feel comfortable with it, you can teach and you can create a nice community through Zoom. It has different features to, break out rooms and discussion boards, and now technology is booming with too many things. I wouldn't use all of them. I would choose exactly what would fit best to my class or to this particular activity. So what I could say is that it can be done. People are starting to get more used to it, but it takes time and practice. It's a different mindset and a different way of interacting, but it's doable and it can be productive.
Well, I've seen a teacher doing art classes for kids of 2-year-old kids in Zoom, and it works.
If they can do that.
Elia, tell us about your experience now in Boston, and how have your teachers in the high schools lived this process of teaching distance education, and how are you seeing? There's a big discussion of if there are going to be real classes or if it seems it's going to be more distance. How are you seeing all this process, Elia?
Yeah, certainly, according to the DESI guidelines, which is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts, we as a district must provide 3 plans: a remote, a hybrid, or face-to-face. And of course, our first priority is the health and safety of students and staff. We know that we need to do some training for safety protocols, especially in the area, let's say, of special education for our students, and also in the area of English language learners. There is also training that we need to do to really become more experts for our teachers to teach online and deliver, as Maria Luisa just mentioned. It took her 2 semesters. We have a little bit of experience for this past spring, but definitely there is more work that we do need to do. I think that some of the challenges that we are encountering right now with our community is probably the access to technology for some of our families.
Imagine if that's a challenge here, just imagine in Mexico. And
yes.
That's why today they announced that it's going to be through TV, because there's not access for everyone to have the kind of computers that we're working right now on. But yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, and the technology, and of course that they all have a computer, and just in working in collaboration, the district with the city, especially the mayor, to make sure that our families do have internet. And then the city has come up this past spring, and we purchased over 30,000 Chromebooks to make sure that our students, they all have a Chromebook, but there is still a challenge, it's a barrier for some of our families. And then as you can imagine, when it comes, if they do not speak English, then it comes the area of translation. And then when you have in a class, you don't want to have our English learners all the time in large groups, because sometimes they do not participate. Mm-hmm. So it's probably best if we mix all students, but they are in smaller groups. And I think that one of the things at the district, we will announce soon, are we going to go remote and then hybrid and then face-to-face, or are we going remote hybrid at the same time? That announcement will come soon. Before Monday, I believe, we should be letting our parents know. There is also, the concern about the practice of the speaking skills, for example, for our students. When you're doing through Zoom, it's much easier to practice the skills of reading and writing than the speaking skills. And also, we do have a lot of parents that need to go back to work. So what happens now if we are remote? And also, who is helping our parents when perhaps at the high school level, they don't know trigonometry, they do not know the algebra, biology? How is it that we help them for some tutoring to make sure that our students are getting the education? So there is a lot of challenges that we are trying, to work through. And the one thing, when I look at COVID-19, I also look the positive side that it has given us in education the opportunity to think about remote learning and technology, and how is it that we need to be embedding all this and be prepared for anything that might come in the future. It's like many jobs, they have not been invented probably yet, dealing with technology. And, we certainly are doing the best we can. And I know our superintendent is concerned about all the things with the buildings, make sure that the bathrooms and the ventilation and the cleanness, and making sure that, the masks that we're going to be providing. So but first, again, is the health and safety of our students and staff. And the food delivery, one of the guidelines is that we cannot have the food in the cafeterias. The students have to eat in the classroom. So then the safety around there is a lot of things that we are meeting and with our school leaders, our teachers, and trying to problem solve, collectively.
But you both have mentioned that this experience of COVID has also brought opportunities, and maybe, for example, right now we shouldn't be traveling, or we should be traveling only for essential purposes. But now with Zoom, you could perfectly more easily have a Mexican group visiting a group of kids in either in a high school or in an elementary school by Zoom, and maybe chatting in Spanish, etc. So there's a lot of opportunities to explore now with these new technologies. I don't know if you want to close your this conversation with a last thought, each one of you.
I would like just to add that Elia has put together a wonderful roundtable on equity, and you, Alberto, was asking us about one challenge that we should pick up and talk about it, right? And I think that being part of this conversation in the Boston Public Schools and also at Harvard, it's clear that the challenges, in order to address all the challenges that are out there, put forward because of the COVID, there needs to be dialogue and conversations at all levels, because this is a multi-layer crisis and times, and we need all the expertise we can from different disciplines, from different constituents, and to be in constant dialogue, to be able to really rethink what is the purpose of education and how to serve, you know, the populations that needed them the most, including Latino children and youth, and really make part of the agenda that language, their language, our language and cultures are so important and so valuable. And they are part also of the legacy of this country. Let's not forget that Spanish was first spoken here as a colonial language, because there were many Native American languages before. Spanish was the first, even before English. So it has power. It was a colonial power, and now it's a minority language. Still very rich and very important to take into account as part of this country's story.
Thank you, Maria Luisa.
Yeah, again, you know, language and culture being an asset. And you know, I just want to end up saying that with COVID-19 right now, our families need to speak up. I know that the district is doing some community information for reopening. And you need to, our families need to write an email to the district or join those meetings so that they can communicate their concerns, because every child has a right to an education. Whether we need to do it remote, or whether we need to do it hybrid, or whether eventually we will go in person, we must meet the education plans for all students. So our parents do need to speak up, you know, into the district about their concerns. We certainly are addressing many different areas. We know that it's a challenge for our families who do not speak English right now to educate remotely for their students. So we need to come up with strategies of how we can help. And the best thing will be by listening to our families and for them to convey what are their needs.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing with us your expertise, your ideas on the challenges that our binational students face here in Mexico, but also here. And the last time we got together was March 9 in that event of International Women's Day at the consulate. And there were many Mexican women that offered to be mentors. So don't forget that we have this community, and that if you design something where you can use more of the Mexican professional women that are here, they might be wonderful also to support all your programs in order to tackle all these challenges. So thank you so much again for being with us today.
Thank you, and thank you, Elia.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Maria Luisa.